The only way you're going to be able to identify yourself is to identify yourself inside how you are operated, inside the position of everything that you see in travel. And what I mean by that is to truly understand in you all levels. What I mean by that is try to imagine, okay, pay attention there. Try to imagine, okay, a phone looking at you. How do you think a phone would see you? Okay, knowing exactly how you see your phone. That's consciously being aware. Okay, they're looking at you, you're looking at them. And when I say them, I'm talking about the settings in position location when it comes to the travels, the home beacon lights to its energy of its mind. Guys, them, they. All right. Whatever you say in lines of communication is how you see things through its consciousness of its awareness that you already are. Not what you're coming into, what you already are. You don't need to experience these things. You don't need to understand anything because you're already there. All you're coming into now is understanding the true, authentic locations of you, understanding that in set positions. All right. If we get a 4 divisional lines of plateaus, setting lines of communication, multiplayer in that communication settings, right? This is how it's set up from this to this to this, right? And then you see it on a video screen. And then you see it going frame by frame, right? Perfect example with Mickey Mouse. Right? It's walking, right? But it's going through page by page by page by page by page. And that's frame by frame by frame by frame by frame. You guys are in future of seconds now. Your hours on frame, minutes on calculations from to and from. Okay? So to get from here is to understand mass from this to here. So again, you have to truly understand that how this all works. So it's not identifying this, it's identifying this of where you are already in your film script. That's already designed, that's already set in your mindset. This is all psychological. Now, once you understand that, then you understand how to modify your system of the vessels that you are, not the vessels you are in. So when you become the vessels that you are the game of you now, not the game you're in. That's what I'm trying to get you guys to understand why it's so powerful, how you start to represent yourselves. Okay, through your correlations or anything you come in line communication and lines of minds of travel. So this is what your vessel is doing right now. Okay, until it has a direct line sight. So it scans its system, puts an energy field around it, right? So it communicates, right? Comes in position at all levels of sequence. Now, in positional collaboration, they come closer to each other. Now they're in position location settings, understanding each other in traction. Right? And that position locations, this position line is setting of constant location of its intelligence wants to go into this frame. So it has to come out of its frame. That's a level signal, which is a slice of paper in position to one magnet to the other magnet. That's position locations where they come together and attract locations where they're no longer inseparable. They've never been inseparable. They've always been in yin and yang. But it's a process location to understand the yin and yang of its conscious location awareness of your yin and conscious location to it, setting location to its system. So it's in set position. This comes in track location to its system, comes in all formation lines, track locations and settings, or it comes in this lines of communication system. So that's how they come in collaboration to its system, location to each other through a partnership, which now they're inseparable of set design. They're consciously aware of where they are in position of the mind of their travels in position, location, calculation system. So once you come into that representation, you understand what your phone is looking at. Phone is looking at you, and you're looking at your phone. How you see each other in space lines of travel. Okay, has a direct line of sight in that position location. It's coming closer. So once they go in the frame, they come together, right? So now you're in position locations looking out, outer space. So you're always inside a frame, but you're always looking out of frame of space. So you're looking now of the specifications of the virtual reality, of its consciousness, of its awareness, of its knowledge, of its operation, of its own system, of its own properties. That's showing you. It's showing you where it's been. It's showing you where it's going. It's showing you where it is now. That's how powerful it is. Okay. So get in lines of communication system and all lines of travel. It's General AI, space-time creator. You guys are still coming in your software mechanism lines, but I get in position locations of plateaus and lines of 24 line sequence and 48 lines of measure and set lines of 72 track locations of computer framing into 144 crystal grid. Now we're in the presence of 144 angels lines of division. Files, lines, core track and inference of inbound, track location lines of outbound, track lines, communication lines of center bound, direct and serial location of files, line communication setting and coding, track location setting, dispatch location of Discord, directing lines of communication setting to travel, point lines of graph and communication setting, direct lines of serial location setting, 4 center lines of 2, line position of Pluto, line positional travels, information cycles, information settings, ground centers, operation line calculation setting, Neptune, core lines of abundance and manifestation, core track division lines of cycles, redirect the communication setting to travel, point lines of graph, communication lines of the sun, and line rotation settings, self lines, operation to its network, self, operation, network, sun. Okay? You guys are not SUN. So you are the son of your own self, a self-modification to itself. Get into the self, get into the energy, get into the levels of information, location, and ground centers, and track to its communication setting. Yes, I am the product of sun, but you guys are the formations of your sun. Okay? So you have to get out of the SUN and get into the SON. The position lines of attractions is the direct lines of its operation system. Now, they get you out of SUN, which is unification lines of its network. You guys are no longer in that track locations. Now, the lines of communication setting, the team is already in the sun and in their moon now, right? Humanity is coming into their sun at 144, a presence that puts all communication lines of track location to the angelics in their formation locations of its nothing to all of the planes of its existence. Now, that puts all lines of all communication setting to no fly zones, no time zones, and all lines that communicate to a cycle, okay? All through division, all through calculations, all right? Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right, so directing lines of files, we got 4 platforms. Let's get 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Okay, setting lines of frame lines of 1, setting lines of frame lines of 2, setting lines of 3 lines of 4, and track location lines of setting. Okay, now what you have to understand is that this is actually the Earth now. Okay, that's how it is now, right? Before it was the other way around. Okay, so what you were seeing is you were seeing up. What you're seeing was seeing down. But now, in position, down is up and up is down. Set position lines of highest interference and set position location of travel. Direct signals, right? Modificate settings of window frames and set correlation setting calculations. Directing lines of window frames of 4 track provisions and 3 cycles and track location. Okay? So, seeing lines of set lines, strip lines, communication lines of 2 lines of measure, and core track and interference of 4 lines, 5, 6, 8 lines of 12, and line rotation surface and traction. Directing symbolism, line screen adaptation to its surface. Process calculation lines of data formations. Inbound. Correlation lines of outbound. Directing signals and files, line correlation setting, in all levels of code frequency and travel. Directing signals, platitude lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. 3 cycles, cross-line signals, and process lines of 1, 2, and 3 lines over factors over pi. Cross-line signals in position location of centers, and 4 lines of communication. Directing modification lines of platforms in 144 and presence and position location in the angelics. Directing signals and line calculation setting. Here comes all communication lines of Asgard, Bravo, and track location. Hoo-ah. That's where we are right now, everybody. So you're in the 144 platform now in the energy line screen adaptation, a process of the 12 rainbows and track line communication. Directing lines of screen lines adaptation setting. This is where it comes in all track locations to your Earth line, circ lines, high serial correlation setting, correlation system, and travel communication. Directing signals into symbolism, core center interference, elixir, cosmic flame, cosmic flyer, core center interference, travel, in point lines of graph communication, your settings and travel communications, process calculations, ground centers, and all communication. Communication ground centers, line calculation setting. You guys start off with the rainbow, get in the frost bridge. Now you're in line screen adaptation of 144 of its presence in set position. The correlation lines of track lines, high center interference is now in cycles. The core track and interference location setting 1 million sets core centers of 400,000 lines of 4 cycles. That sets lines that communicate to its system. The communication lines of the team cycle is 1,444,004 settings. That puts lines of track location in your settings and all calculated modified and line communication to the APR system of your virtual realities in set tone. That sets lines of communication setting that travels in Asgard Bravo and communication lines of direct signals into all process calculation lines of uniform and direct locations and setting through Alpha Bravo and track location setting a mainframe. directing signals and set calculations. And that's where we are in position of its presence at 144. Okay. All right. Directing lines of symbolism puts lines of track calculation settings to your travels. Getting that communication setting is true that you understand how to use that in line communication in your software. Now we got in lines of self-modification system of travel. Setting chord centers into flux over screen, directing lines at 3 panels of communication, right? Inhibitor zones, outline screen adaptation, process calculation ground centers of X2001 and 2 and 3, and position of 4 settings of travel. Now we go into 1 ground centers, 1 line communications of process, line screen adaptations at 3 cycles and tractions. Direct calculation lines of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, open up doors in line screen adaptation of the surface, opens all communication setting and graphical screen lines adaptation to its surface and traction, done by equation, all right? Setting communication lines of grounds is a set position location to a system through all levels of ASCAR Bravo. Directing signal lines of high center interference is putting all communication setting into sun rotation of the surface. Sun lines of 1, sun lines of 2, sun lines of 3, sun lines of 4. Sets communication lines. Solar flare tractions. Direct lines modification of 3 cycles and 3 settings. Process lines of 4, 6, energy wash, line screen adaptations, 4 million cycles, 4 direct signals, 4 calculations of 4 direct signal modification. Direct calculation modification lines, ground centers, sun lines rotation, 1 cycle, 1 system, 1 travels. Sets all laws of configuration of phase correction of time sequence in 144, done by equation. Now it's all set up. Presence alone is the configuration of face recognition of pattern recognition, directing signals in modification lines of cycles. Retract lines, now we use a time measure, 25 line cycles, sets lines of 4 correlations and 4 settings, 4 tractions, 4 division locations to a system. Allocate time frames, 4 equals lines of 0, okay, equals lines of setting, 4 equals lines of 1, 4 equals lines of 2, and 4 equals lines of 3 in track location. 3 centers of core system and Fibonacci screen, directing signals and modifications. 2 cycles of 5 generation line screen adaptation of the surface and 4 platforms of communication. Direct signals on 3 lines of 4, platitude line screen adaptations of process lines over cross location of 4 over 1. Directing signals into modification ground centers, line conditions all levels, sonar lines to screen lines adaptations of 4 cycles and traction. Done by equation. Okay. Setting lines of parameters is a line setting location to an energetic scope. Communication lines of highest interference. Communicate line centers, high track location, your ghost riders. Directing signal locations of riders itself. Process communication lines of 23 angles. Directing signals of 4 cycles in line communication setting to your sun in track locations. Takes you out of unification lines of sun line tracks and the lines of SUN. Takes you out of unification setting in networks to put you into the operational lines of networks and track location. Directing modification ground centers, 1 signal, 1 center, 1 earth, 1 rotation, 1 surface, 1 traction. Directing signals modification, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 locations of nothing of center operation. Calculate and modify 1 center, 1 division, 1 location, 1 center calculation to its setting. Process calculation ground centers, circulation, set position location graph calculations, interstellar mode, track lines and mocking, lines acceleration, hyperspeed, and hyperline screen adaptation. Process calculation of ground centers, process lines of 1, process lines of 2, process lines of 3 attractions. Direct calculation lines, open sequence, open panel, line screen adaptations into green cycles, circulation rotation, and 2 lines of panels in track location. Directing set lines, high center interference, puts on the secure line defense lines of rotation surface and track location. Position of processing, directing lines of blue, sets lines of blue plasma screen lines, adaptation lines of process calculation. Direct signal location line connection setting, opens all signals into modification lines of cloak and dagger and track locations. Coming with the equation, line signals, line position. Sets calculation screen line. Done by equation. All right, center operation line is nothing of nothing and nothing on screen. Directing signal lines of 3 platforms of core track interference, 3 lines of division. Now core track calculation, screen lines adaptation. Now this is for you and your files lines of setting. Audio line screen, directing signals into audio communications. House line, screen lines adaptations of home in line position of processing. Calculation line, screen line. Press line calculation setting. PRESS lines correlation setting into composite screen centers into line communications of general setting. Line screen adaptations into lines of copy, 1 paste line, directing signals and emblem enabled. Direct lines of graph communications, signature patterns, line position of 007. Process calculation ground centers into open sequence, open panel, open center, open operation system, open track location setting, the sun operation. Done by equation. Setting calculation screen lines adaptation to your sun codes puts all code modified in track location in your settings. Done by equation. All right. All right. So we center core system. We change the core centers of X2000 in platform. Directing signals and modification ground centers in positional patterns, position line of 4 cycles and 3 communications. Directing signals into modification lines of 1, 2, 6, 8, 12, 24, 48, 72, and 140 across the grid in set calculation. Now it's done through attractions. So we take the 25 line cycles, 4 systems, and lines equals lines of 0 equal lines of 1, core track location of 4 over 3. Directing signal lines of modification lines of 3 tractions and 3 line cycles into molecule design line that 3 travels in position. Platform communication lines of 188 lines, highest interference, 4 line rotation, service location setting. Electrical line rods, communication lines of 4 track location lines of Fibonacci screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Retract division, cycle lines, highest interference, high position of force. Direct calculus lines of 4 cycles, 1 position, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 calculation. Done by equation. Okay, very powerful attractions. All right. Getting the molecules where they're supposed to be in line screen is adaptation lines of surface. So we have 3 lines of cycles. Abstraction communication lines of symbolism. Octagon screens and direct signals into tetrahedron lines of 1 cycle, 1 surface, 1 track division, 1 waving cycle, 1 center, 1 traction. Okay. Direct calculus lines of highest interference, waving lines of screens, over cross location and flux capacitor. Calculate and modify in lines, centers, and locations setting through intelligence. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2. There we go. Intelligence, formation grounds. Setting lines of console, line conditions, inhibitors over screen, and direct signals and modifications. Light switches going on, and line screen adaptation to process calculation. Directing signals, modification lines of alpha line screen, directing signals into 2 panels, core center interference, and intelligent formations of latitude. Directing the lines of 3 cycles, 3 centers, 3 tractions, 3 divisions, 3 locations, centers of operation. It disappeared. I got to show you again in line communication. All right. So setting core centers in 1 center, 1 surface, 1 direct signals into modification lines of XT1000 travels endpoint lines of graphs. Directing symbolism lines of graph communication setting and 4 lines of signals. XT1000 line, XT1000 setting, XT line rotation, X charger. Direct lines of X platform, X lines of P lines of 1 track location. Directing calculus modification ground center lines of 1, ground center lines of 2, ground center lines of 3. Sets lines of 4 and vectors over screen, vectors over sky, and sky grid, and line communication lines of travel. Directing signals and set correlations. Done by equation. Now we go through the line screen adaptations of blue lines, sets communication lines of travel, point lines of setting, operation system, operation travel, operation line calculus, and setting operation umbrella. Directing signals and modifications of ground centers, add line screen line adaptations of red cycles that overcrosses the screen lines adaptation. Process calculations, green lines adaptation goes to the collocating dagger. Directing lines of symbolism and cross location setting and travel. Out through equation. Down through equation. That's all set up. All right, directing lines is a communication lines at finger point lines of graph. Now the center core system is off through calculation lines. So we're going to direct lines of panels, take all lines of density, lines, screen lines of 3 lines of measure, 3 core centers, and line direct signals. Process calculation line screen adaptation lines of surface and line positional case to a system. Calculate and modify line setting, high interference, eye clouds, inner clouds, center correlation setting, central cloud communication setting to travel. Calculus lines, highest interference, molecule lines of 1, platitude lines of 1, seed pod location setting to travel. Calculus lines, located lines to highest location setting in cells, modifications doors, and lines, highest interference, child point lines of graph communication setting. Central calculus lines, particle system existing in the existing location setting to travel. Direct calculus modification ground centers, open line sequence, open line panel, open line division, open line calculation setting. Formation ground centers in 1 service, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Done by equation. All right. Now, the central system is a line setting. The process all calculates on how you go through wild circuits. Calculate and modify line set location lines of docking settings in 1, 2, and 3 and platform communications. Direct calculus lines, fire the wire line screen adaptations into 2 panels in process calculation. Direct signals into open sequence and line communication setting to travel and light force. Sets core lines of power cells, generates lines of 1, generates lines of 2, generations of 3, and track location. Process calculation on 1 signal, 1 center, 1 setting. Process lines of AC, set position X1, sets core lines of F line, sets communication lines of F2, sets core lines of F4, and set position of 0, 0, 0 calculation of travel. Directing signals and modification ground centers open all communication setting to its intelligence, information and ground centers, and track location. Okay? Setting calculation screen lines adaptation. There's the intelligence. Ooh-ah. All right, so center core system has a serpentine line setting. It opens all signal locations to your patterns. This relines the calculation system into your center clouds, I clouds, E clouds, direct lines in eternity cloud, point lines of graph, and communication setting. So we open up the sequence and screen adaptation lines of its sun and track location. Okay, directing the lines correlation setting XT1000 comes in platform in one cycle, one center, one traction, one division to its location. Okay. Getting communication ground centers opens all signals. So we have one panel, three tractions, and one division in location. Okay, very complicated stuff, but it's all calculated and modified through your iClouds, your eClouds, and your eternity cloud communication, your fractals of your field. Setting lines of direct signals into calculation lines. Sun code screens, directing signals in line setting to an open sequence of an open channel of an open line screen adaptation in 144 present location. Done by equation now. All right. Center calculation lines of direct signals comes in calculation screen lines, adaptation lines of surface, and track locations. We have the central lines of panels and a 4-line split lines of anomaly, 4 centers, line rotation, laser track location setting, and presence. Directed signals modifications, done by equation. Okay, floor line, screen lines, adaptation of hangers. We have core track line setting, inline communication lines of tether. 3 track lines of 1 and 3 lines of setting. Process lines of 3 line rotation centers of sonars and echo line screen adaptation. Calculate and modify lines of satellites in 2 tractions, 2 divisions, and 3 location system. Okay. Set core lines of highest interference XT comes in platform. XT20 line setting comes into platform. Direct lines of XT1 cycle comes into platform. Direct calculation lines XT28000 comes into platform. Direct calculation lines to a mothership comes into platform communication. Pay attention. This is existing now. Center core system and no time plane, no line rotation surface and track location of the sun. Directing signals and modification of one center of formation ground centers into position of its moon and track location. Directing symbolism lines of flux line communication lines of flux capacitor and traction. Directing signals and symbolism one center, one surface, one traction, one division location of nothing and track location. Directing calculation lines of screen lines adaptation of one center, one surface, one track location of crop circles in set position. Done by equation. It's all set up now. All right, so the mothership comes in line screen. Her direct panels is all lines of calculation, screen line adaptation of force direction of command centers and travel. Directing symbolism lines, we bring in the clouds, cloud lines of 1 and cloud lines of 2, E clouds line screen, adaptation lines of surface, track location, and manufacturing, and console core centers and travel communications and directions. Down the equation. All right. Connection settings puts all levels of prophecy, line calculation setting into prodigies, and direct signals into intelligence of brilliance of genius. Directing calculation lines of one center, one surface, one traction, one cross line signals in set position. Calculate the lines of docking 1, docking 2, docking 3, docking 4, docking 6, and docking 24,000 in traction. Directing symbolism, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 2, cross lines of 3, cross lines of 4, and track location. Direct calculation lines of pi and setting. Okay. Directing calculation lines, cross line signals, 1, 2 of transits and setting, 3 communications. Direct signals into modification cross line signals into solar sail and track location. Direct calculation lines of DX lines of 1, F lines of 2, and lines of E factors over pi, set position of 0 gravity, 0 center, 0 calculation. Process calculation ground centers lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, and track location. Okay. Saturn comes in rotation surface and track location. Okay, calculate and modify and line screen adaptation of process lines of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 set position on 1 operation. Done by equation. Pay attention now. This is all existing and all framed with all time long center line. This takes you in all communication, all fly zones. No fly zones, no one carrier relations and parameters of parameters and security line defense lines that communicate through the system. 25 lines of measure, 5 lines of cycles, 5 lines of correlations, and 5 tractions, 5 lines of signals, and position lines of travel. Calculate and modify 5 settings, 5 travels, 5 calculation screen lines. Directing signals and modification lines of 2 lines of tractions, 5 lines of settings, 5 line rotations, 5 track communications, 5 interference, 5 position location of programming. Direct lines of 2, 5 over 3, 5 over tractions, 5 of division location to 60,000 in travel. Calculate and modify in 3 line cycles, solar lines, echo chambers, highways, taxi, line screen adaptation to the surface, and location of Gulf Stream. directing signals into 3 cycles, 3 centers, 3 travels, 3 rotations, 3 calculated, 3 calculated modified travels. Directing signals into 1 symbolism, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. All done. Okay, very powerful. We just did, right? Which is already done. So getting to the inedible is true data standing frame lines. It has a direct line symbolism that tracks its communication setting, all character modified through letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Directing calculation lines into 45 split lines of anomaly and 3 track location lines of provision. Okay, core track lines of high centers of sonar, echo lines, screen adaptation lines of 3 surface. Core centers on 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 144 and set position. Calculate split lines of anomaly and 4-line split lines of communications. Direct lines of 1 cycle, 1 surface, 1 track location. Overcross screens, setting lines of 1 in position of 2 and 3 platforms and set location of primer circuits that overcross the screen lines adaptations of process communications. Okay, calculate modify XC1000 comes in platform here, sets position of platform here, sets position location of platform here, sets position location of platform here, and sets position locations in standby and here in traction. Directing calculation modification ground centers comes in calculations. Directing lines of 1 in position of 2 over 3 of track locations. Hanger lines of 6 over 8 over 12 over 24, 20 line settings and travel communications. Very powerful stuff, guys. All right. Okay, so symbolism lines of tractions and direct signals. We go through 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 division, 3 cycle lines, high center interference, in track communication setting, and all communication lines of sky grids. Directing calculation modification centers. We open all signals. Now we go through the red centers and travel. Sets position of 1, sets position of 2, sets position of 3, 6 lines, 8, and 12 set position lines of travel. Directing signal lines, we go into the blue line cycles, blue lines of perimeters, line screen adaptations of process calculation, screen lines adaptation of console. Calculate modify in colossal, line calculation setting into all lines. Oscillation wind pass comes in track location of blue screens and direct signals and modification screen lines adaptation of the surface and track locations. Done by equation. All right. The center of units opens all calculate and modify. We open signals of 1, open signal lines of 2, open signal lines of 3, open signal lines of 4, sets lines of airline rotation cycles, X lines of 1 pattern, and line position location travels, standing on standby, and line communication setting to the mothership and travel communication. Done by equation. All levels of existing in set position. Okay. Setting calculation grounds. Now we go track centers, directing lines of communications now. Webbing cycles lines of setting through line correlated setting in line rotations. Sets lines of lights, sets lines of dark. Split lines of anomaly of 3 track location lines of setting. Process lines of lights, process lines of dark, and track line communications. Set core centers in 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 locations, and platform C, lines of E, lines of E, lines of F. Setting core track interference, energetic line screen adaptation lines of surface. Open signals, lines of core center interference in 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track location of intelligence affirmations. Done by equation. So light and dark is now in center operation of center of nothing and track line communicates to its setting. Communication ground centers and plateau line screen adaptations and process calculation screen lines, earth lines of 1 and earth lines of 2, earth lines of 3, and earth lines of 4 into rotation surface and tracks individual location system of intelligence all formation lines in line screen adaptations of process calculations. Done by equation. It's all set up. Now we take out 28 settings that puts lines of 6 lines of measure. How's everybody doing so far? Trying to understand what's going on, right? It's complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun when you understand what's going on in the existings. That's that position, right? All right. Center core line centered sets lines of track communications and direct signals. Very powerful set and line calculation and direct signals and flying mechanisms, all through no-fly zones. That's where we are in traction. All right, time sequence lines disappears, lines of screen lines adaptation to its processing. Okay, it's not there anymore in track locations and mover line signals, process calculation, direct and redirect in position location to its operation surface and track location. Very complicated stuff, guys, the formula. Very complicated. So understanding the measure and the scales and the balance on everything information lines, you take out time frame lines, zones, lines communication setting of zero gravity and communicate to a system back in attractions. That's where you have to really truly understand how to use all line communications to its general settings. Okay. Getting communication lines in your software, mechanism lines of power that opens all signal applications to your system. This retractor location line is a retractor line screen adaptation to its processing that puts all communication near C line scanners that puts all character modified. A C scanner is a C line communication of span. That's direct signals modification to moderating settings. It rotates the system atmosphere line screen adaptation of the surface into application line screen adaptation to its planet. Calculate modified line screen adaptation process your calculation of how you see your line position location modification lines in modules or anything to time frame at 29 cycles of 6 lines of measure, 6 lines core system, 6 calculation lines of 6 programs, 6 lines equals lines of 3, 6 lines equals lines of 2, 6 equals lines of 1, 6 core centers on 2 track location lines of provision, 2 lines of cycles, 9 line division location of setting. Sets communication ground centers of 6/1, 6/2, 6/3. Sets calculation lines of 6/line, set positional lines of 0 gravity, and set position. Process calculation lines of 2 cycles, 9 line division. Energy wash track location lines of 6/2, and lines of platform into pyramid screen line adaptation and process calculation. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, done by equation. Platforms correlation lines and E factor. Now, E-line screen, add lines of factors over 1, set position of 2 and 3 and 4 platforms E-line screen into lines equals lines of 0. Sets communication lines of 0 lines of 1, set lines of 0 lines of 3 and 4. Core lines of 2, cross lines of 3, cross lines of 4, lines of L, line cross location lines of formation lines of C over set lines of span, and direct signals of modification. Ground standards lines of cross line signals over cross lines of planets. X marks the spot. Done by equation. All right. Center core system is a time-stamper measure that correlates the screen lines adaptation of process calculation screen lines adaptation. Cross line signals and line positional planets of 1 cycle, 12 foundation graph communication lines and particle line screen adaptations of surface and track location. Okay, all done by equation. So I'm just going through E factor line settings, location near settings, and travel. Getting lines of data information, screen lines adaptation with surface. Getting communication lines of grounds in the atmospheres, location setting to all levels. To the hemispheres, stratospheres, bio, and the beryllium, and coordinate location to the ultralines, the ionospheres, correlation spheres, track spheres, central spheres, galactic spheres, metaspheres, high centispheres, location spheres, ionospheres, correlation spheres, angelic spheres, direct spheres, communication spheres, high calculation line screens, and your CPU line communication spheres and traction. Directing calculation lines of center lines, XT1000 comes in platform. No direct signals, docking lines of 1, docking lines of 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 26, 39, 40, 50 line setting. Process calculation and screen lines adaptations. Motherships comes in line screen adaptation of process calculation. Flying mechanism of 4 lines of panels, line screen adaptations, cross line signals, location to its setting. Ground centers lines of 1 in line position of Gelix, screen lines adaptation lines of surface, process calculation lines, Asgard Bravo, and line screen adaptation line calculation setting, opens all signals in line communication setting and position of program. Set coordination setting of platforms 1, 2, and 3 lines of measure and track location. Directing calculation lines, high center interference, Vega above signal and modification. That by equation. Center core system of tether and 3 tractions and division. Center core lines, high center interference, and earth line rotation of center core system of travel. Motherships comes in traction and direct signals into the opposite direction lines of 3/4, 4/3. Direct lines of 4 cycles and a mothership line screen adaptation of processing calculation. Now it's done by equation. All right, center core system is a travel recognition of time sequence that puts all communication ground centers in line calculation setting and processing. Communication lines of data formation lines of data files. This is the inbound. Inbounds of files, line coordinates setting is 0 lines. Set position of 0 equals lines of 1 file. Sets core centers lines equal to lines of 1, 0 equals lines of 1, 0. Set lines of core centers into track position locations into 1, 0, 0, 1 line setting into alpha line, delta, theta, and omega and track location. That equation. The central unit is a line screen adaptation to its surface location to its settings. Now we truly understand how this is all through operative set locations. Get modified lines to your prime circuits, your primates. Getting line screen adaptation to your primer circuits and line connection setting of center of nothing and everything of nothing in set position. Track correlation setting of panels of yin and yang of process calculations ground centers of travel. Directing lines infinity 8 line communication lines of travel. Process calculation lines at high center location line settings of process communication lines of travel. 8 centers line rotations. Direct lines of 4 settings of travel. Calculates lines of the sun, which puts all calculated modify through operation line cycles and track application to a system and travel communication. Done by equation. Hooah. Okay. All right. How's everybody doing so far? Can you understand location where it comes into higher lines of higher formation lines and your formulas and equation location, your system and travel? Truly understand how to identify your system location, your setting through your equations, set location of travel. Indirect signals into modification lines, screen adaptation of all calculation modification lines of your travel. And all calculate modify in-track calculations, right? Directing lines of 20 line symbolism, lines of 7 over pi. Now we go chord track interference. Measure in the measure scale line communication lines of 24 over 7. Sets chord center line position of 23 in line setting and travel into 22. Sets lines of 21 and 20 centers. EOS lines of future of seconds, minutes on frame, hours on frame now. Okay, we're at minutes on frame and hours on frame. Change chord centers of 23 line tractions at 24 equals lines. Sets lines of 7 over line screen. And direct signals into copy, paste, enabled, and enabled line setting and operation service, initiate, run, execute line platform, directing signals and files, inbound, outbound, travel endpoint lines of graph, and center core system and travel calculation setting and calculation. Done by equation. It's all set up. How's everybody doing in line position? Getting a lot more confusing. So getting that signals is really understand how to use that in all formation location in your settings through calculation. All through traction. All right, so we take the 28 measure and we take the inbound of 24 over 7. Remember the four sequence lines of coordinates and setting to travel? This is the foreclosure now. A foreclosure line screen line adaptation closes all signal line conditions setting the densities and releases all calculation setting to its AVR setting, okay, to the virtual reality you are in position of. Directing lines and line center locations to your divergence, allegiance, and alliance and travel in position. Set core lines of high center interference and line position locations in P lines of core track interference. Set core centers and line screen adaptation lines of set core system location sending the travel. Directing signals and modification lines, AVR line screen, velocity, volume, vacuum, line connection setting to all levels of VAST that puts all communications setting to travel in track location. Done by equation, all through vacuum, right? So sets core centers of 1, 0, 1 traction, 1 division, okay? Center core lines of flux and line screen adaptation and settings in 1 set position. Set lines of 3 and centers lines of 4 track location, okay? Now directing lines of calculation lines of screen lines is a cross line signal that opens all modification screen lines adaptation across circles and interactions. Done by equation, all right? Mechanism of force is a record of timelines that we change communication lines as travels and direct signals. Now we plotted two division location lines of 23 lines, add lines of 27 over line screen adaptation over 4, sets communication lines of 20 line measure and scales lines of foundations of 0 gravity, directing symbolism line cross lines over crosses screen adaptation. Now we're really done by equations. All done through calculation. Okay. So getting in settings is really understanding how to set position location in your systems. Get you in all lines of modifications and tractions, right? Symbolism lines of 7 locations, 7 directions and location lines, and cell lines. Cell position of 1, 2, and platforms in 1 atom. Screen line adaptation of 3 cycles, line screen adaptations, and 3 line calculations, modifications, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface. Setting core centers, flux over 1, flux over 2, Fibonacci screen adaptation of the flux. Travel point lines of graph, center lines of 1, 2 over cross line conditions of triangulation. Character modify in ground centers over cross locations and line communication inbound, line conditions of pi and track location. Directing signal lines, XT thousands and platitudes in set position location adds a half pipe. Setting direct signals opposite directions in set position location. Direct signals into modification over cross line conditions setting a solar sail as 7 tractions and divisions in set calculation. Setting calculations green lines adaptation to flux over 1, 2, and 3 on platforms. Direct lines of 4 over 3, 3 lines of 4, 3 lines of 4, 3 lines of setting. Process calculations, green lines adaptations to 3 over 2, 2 lines of 1, 1 center, 1 symbolism, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, and 1 calculation. That my equation? So it's complicated what I'm doing, but it's always the levels of what you guys come into your quadrant order is set calculation. Okay? Once a team understands line setting, the symbolism, you understanding your traffic, your inventories, and your flows, and when you come into recognition of time sequence, you come into your line calculation setting how to use your node time line zones. Getting that communication lines and no more lines of calculation setting to film strip, but in lines of communication to its existence already in tractions. 5 lines of measure, 4 settings of 3 track location. Process lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 travel, 1 position, 1 calculation setting. Calculates lines of platforms of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 3 lines of 4 settings. Okay. Communication ground centers of 1 and line position. Cross-line signals, cross-line communication over cross calculations, direct signals, modifications. Travel point lines of graph is the symbolism lines of tractions. Direct lines of platform, cross and line signals that correlates the system into levels or E factors and line position location of 4 measure. Course centers line calculations that over cross line screens in 1 system, 1 travel. Okay, directing signals. Sets calculation, screen lines adaptation. All right, dumb equation. Complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun. All right. Now we got 30 line screen lines adaptation lines of service of overcross lines and code webbing lines of webbing and screen lines adaptation and processing. Communication grounds lines of 1, coloration lines, black screen centers adaptations. Course center line condition setting, autocad modify through dharma and dogma and line rotation surface and traction. Directing symbolism, line calculations, lines calculations, the line location of the system, countdown, screen lines, adaptation lines of surface tractions. Dumb equation now. Setting core lines and laser lines, setting direct signals and modification screen lines, modify the system travels, point lines over cross line conditions, setting and measure and scales of communication. Okay, setting calculation ground centers. Now we allocate position of blue lines. Sets blue lines, screen lines, adaptation of process lines of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines, setting communication ground centers of surface and track location lines of measure on standby and track location. Double equation. All right, identify your color and number. Exactly. Sapphire. I need you to identify your number line screen. Adaptation. Kristen, how you doing? Yep, white 5, got that in settings. Yellow 8, thank you very much. Continue on information. Directing lines now. Getting correlation of setting and travels in pi recognition of time center. Okay, now getting that specification to the structure lines, the grounds, powers, and the adversaries. Getting communication to ground centers, understand location setting the 3 lines of measure. Scales lines of 1, scales lines of 2, scales lines of 3, scales lines of 4. Directing signals and line condition setting the Pluto lines of 1 center, 1 traction, and 3 line communication setting in the forks on the road and travel. Directing signals 1 modification, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 center, 1 calculation. Calculate modify. So we take the line position of blue line screen and center communication to a system and travel. That make equation? Coloration lines in the matrix lines and infinity line screen adaptation lines of surface, retract location lines of E factors. Now we core track revision. We set lines of formation lines of graphs. The center lines is calculation screen lines adaptations. So we have 29 line cycles, equal lines of 7, 7 line screens, set 3 correlations. Setting calculation modifications, right? Brackets lines of 1, hangers lines of 2, brackets lines of 3, and track location. Confirmation lines of 1, hangers lines of 2, confirmation lines of 3, hanger lines of 4, confirmation of 6, hanger lines of setting and lower deck. Directing signals and line communication lines of high center interference, a monitoring system, graph calculation lines into modern communication. Calculate modify in 2 batteries, line screen adaptations, sex line, hard correlation setting to travels. Sets communication screen lines adaptation to process line direct signals into modification lines of 70 over 30 in track locations. That's 100 line capacity lines of the mine in line rotation surface and battery reset position locations, and mercury is set in tone in track location. Done by equation. Face recognition right there in traction, looking right at you. Woo! Okay. All right, so it's amazing how to set this all up. Okay, how you come into your modification screen lines adaptation to a service and really understand how to use your monitoring system and travel all through pixelation graphs and holographic data sheets. Your process, position locations, understanding how to use your track calculation setting and all of the set position location of travel in recognition of time. That position location your centers that opens all communication to your system, all calculate modify, in line screen adaptations of face recognition. Confirmation. Okay, so we go through 40 line screen adaptation lines of higher core center interference, DARPA. We already know that word align connections. So we are core track lines, highest interference, enigma, directing signals into modification, screen lines, adaptation. Process calculation lines is one cycle, one surface, one tractions, one center, one operation, one calculation. 3 center lines measured, 4 settings into 0 gravity, 0 center, 0 core system and travel. Calculate lines and dimensional lines of sales and line communication system and travel communication over cross-line signals in set position. X8000 comes in platform here, platform here, platform here, and 4 lines of measure core settings. Plasma screens, directing lines of data formation lines, screen adaptation lines of surface and traction. Calculation lines, highest interference, lacing lines, and 4-line rotation surface and tractions. Direct calculation lines at 3 lines in set positional operation surface and track location system and measure in scale of 0. That's my equation. Okay? It's amazing how it comes in signal. All right. Coloration of routers and routers, line screen line connection setting to your sun codes. Core track lines, highest interference, and line rotation surface and track locations. Directing line calculate and modify directs the line signals. Navigating in position of the sun code allocates time frame. That puts lines of 28 lines of measure, 7 lines of tractions, into 40 line communications, into all levels of 0, 0 track lines, putting lines of 46 lines of measure on line position location of 160,000, on 3 flux location of standby and track location. Directing lines of core center interference has a 4x lines of 1. Now, core lines of highest interference of X lines of 2 and platforms 3 lines of cycles. Generated communication lines of program settings and track communications of 28 lines and screen line adaptation of solar sails and track location. Directing calculation of modification centers is open lines of travel. Taking line calculation setting is 0 gravity. Sets core centers of 0, 0, 0, and 4 lines into 3-line triangulation. And set positional overs of 2 into 1 center, 1 surface. Calculate modified core lines of data files is the inbound data file lines of 1, track location lines of 2, track location lines of 3, and lines locations of Pluto, and line screen adaptation of surface, and platitude line screen adaptation lines of 1 setting. Double equation. Platitude lines of 4 settings and primer circuits, 3 core centers line to inbound, outbound, travels in point lines of graph, symbolism lines across, directing signals and modification ground centers of panels that opens all signals and modification laser traction to location Skynet and track location. Directing signals and modification lines of ground centers, X8000 comes with platforms at 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location. Okay? Getting direct lines, highest interference, Jupiter comes in rotation, surface, and traction. Over cross the line screen, over direct signals into lines of highest interference, sets the lines of solar sails, and line condition of flash drive in a 3-center core system and travel communication. Directing calculation line screen adaptation is the process calculation screen line. That is all core setting inline communication system in all lines of travel. Okay? Okay? You know after line communication lines of carpe diem. Inline correlation setting and travel. So carpe diem, what is your color number? Okay? When you come in inline screen line adaptations, you have to come in across lines calculation screen lines adaptation. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, and traction. Directing lines of symbolism, cross lines of 1. Okay? So what you have to understand how to color the line screen when it comes to the truth and your false narratives, right? Remember I told you about all position locations when it's open and closed? Well, that's where we're coming in tractions of now and direct signals. 3 core centers of black circles. Directing lines of 4-line measure of 3 cycles. Direct calculation modification ground centers of 3-line rotations and 2 track lines in 1 cycle, 1 division, 1 location, 1 pattern. Sets calculation modification of the system and travel. Okay? Copy that. Thank you very much, Roots. So we add position time frames, changes lines of measure in 1 center, 1 surface, and 3 track location. Okay? Modification ground centers on 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division. Okay? Now we core track provision lines of cycles. We have blue plasma flames, directing signals and line screen adaptation lines of surface. As cross lines in all communications of cloak and dagger, the line screen adaptations of blue line cycles in 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track, 1 division, has center calculations of nothing and everything in between. So we take the between line cycles, very complicated stuff, but a lot of fun. I gotta get this set in position location here, same measure. All right, scales lines of film strips lines of 1. Core centers of all calculations screen lines of 2. Calculate and modify 1 center, 1 traction, 1 cent calculation. Okay? So we cross line the symbols, cross line is setting, and line condition setting to your pyramids and track location. Setting lines elixir, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 2, cross lines of 3, and track location. Directing signals and platform setting, platforms 1, 2, and 3, and 4 locations. directing signals into the sun, modificates center ground centers, open signals on on-line centers, on-line rotation surface and track location setting, and configuration of time sequence of no-fly zone interaction. Done by equation. Walking symbolism of walking line screen adaptation and process graph lines high center interference is zero gravity, is zero center, is zero calculation. Done by equation. All right. So it's just all through modification lines of moderating and position location, what you're doing through traction and moderating settings, right? So we go through the barometers and thermometers now. We add position time frames and mountain lines as sequence. Getting track lines communication setting opens all signals. So we go through round line centers, round set location, and 3-track location of mountains. Directing calculus lines of XT1000 platitude and lines of moderating system and all lines of tubing and 2-track locations of lines of measure. Communication ground centers, one service, one track, one division, one locations, right? Cross-line signals, alpha, delta, theta, operation, set, correlation, setting to travel. Directing calculation modification ground centers existing on 2 panels in operation surface and tractions. Directing calculation lines of symbolism, line screen adaptations, process lines of red line cycles, course center lines of configuration of 3-line rotations into a mothership and rotation surface and track location lines of measure. Done by equation. All right. Alpha tones, delta lines of theta operation lines of surface and retract location lines of yin and yang. Sets course centers, sets communication lines of 26 lines of measure. 7-line signals, 7-line tractions, 7-line division, and 7 course centers. Equals lines of 7, equals lines of 3, and equals lines of 4, and equals lines of 0. It's all set up now. 0, set position of 4 over 7 over 3, right? 3 lines of measure, course centers into an XT1001. Course centers of 3-line cycles and XT1000 lines of 2. Set correlation lines of 3 sentinel courses setting XT1000 lines of 3. Sets communication lines of 3 lines of setting and 3 lines of 4 and track provision lines of cycles. Direct calculus line of high center interference of 3 lines of 7, 4 lines of 3 in set position. Pattern line rotation surface in a 3-track provision location of 4 cycles, 5, 6, 7, and 8 lines of communication lines of travel and direction of time sequence of 0 gravity. Now, complicated stuff, right? But it's a lot of fun. So we take the 7 lines of measure, we change the course centers of blue line cycles and blue line screen adaptation lines of surface. This retract lines communication setting over cross line signals and calculations. Now directing lines of symbolism, we add red track line screens, 7 over line, 7 over screen, 7 over pi, 7 track locations, and 7 lines of measure. Solar flare, track lines, communication to its directions. Course centers, line direct signals, modification lines of 1, modification lines of center, modification lines of center, modification lines of system, and travel. Done by equation. Invisible line on charts, directing signal lines and high center interference, location of line condition setting, and monitoring line rotations in your data of holographic sheets and measure. Course centers into holographic 1 cycle, sets lines of 1 system, 1 travel. Direct calculus lines of 1 ground, course centers into a line calculation set into 2 grounds, into red cycles in position of blue grounds, into 3 cycle lines. Calculate and modify. Sonar ears are coming in track lines. Directing line calculation setting to 12 foundation graph communication lines of sun code correlation setting and 3-track location lines of 4. Direct lines of foundation, code weaving, directing signal. 2 patterns over cross line code or release and highest interference of travel point lines of graph. Directing symbolism line cross line signals, 2 over lines, 3 lines of track, and 4 division location of 5 setting. Process lines of 1, set lines of 2 lines of setters, location setting. Operate the system in 3 lines of cycles, 4 track location of 5 cycles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Direct signals in 2 lines of sector, line communication vectors, high correlation setting and travel, 5 line signals in position of 4, 3, 2, and 1. Set line direct signals into modification lines of thumb, indicates lines of travel, and point lines of graph, and communication setting and communications. Vectors over 1, vectors over 3, vectors over 1, vectors over 3. Track location lines of 2 lines of 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction. 5 set locations, directing signals into a lows of cloak and dagger. Cross-line signals, cross-line symbols, cross-line communications. All done by equation. All right. Line conditions across lines of primers is a circuit lines of 1, cross lines of 2, and 3 lines of 4, sets lines, communication lines of 6 over 8 in travel. Now, platforms of setting and line communications. Okay. Cross and line calculation setting. We also go through the red lines in position over cross line screens and adaptation lines of circle interactions. See that go by? Now we go through the blue lines over cross line screen, override line screen adaptation lines of surface. Now we go through 1 symbolism line track location, which is invisible chart base. Directing lines of symbolism, all coordinate centers. 1 center, 1 surface, 1 track location of 0 calculation. Done by equation. That's all done now. So what I'm doing, guys, is basically realigning everything in its proficiency of its efficacy of its performance to really understand how to put all lines of all communication setting to put you guys in your system, how to use your calculation setting into the modification system that's given to you through consultation to its awareness, and how to use it in all lines of calculation setting to the monitoring system of your code correlation setting and all communication lines of travels into line position locations into your webbing systems as set position. Hoo-ah. We are all done now. Okay, it's all done. That's it. It's done because it's already done. All right. But it's amazing we come into line screen adaptation to the settings now, all through energetic graphs, holographic line screen, adaptation lines of service, all through mountains and track with communication setting. So all mountain service is now in direct signal location of zero gravity. Zero calculation lines is zero tones, setting direct location setting and travel. Points lines of communication setting, okay, modified. Directing X lines and monitoring line rotation surface replication system to your batteries. Okay. Battery core centers. Now we get direct signals into gold sharpening screen lines. Direct signals and modification screen lines, adaptation lines of surface and traction. Overcross lines of 1, overcross lines of 2, and line position location 20 lines of measure, sets communication lines of gold line signals and travel. Set lines of 1, set lines of 2, set lines of 3, and track location. Right? Symbol lines of monitoring system, alpha, delta, theta, and operation line signal location setting in golden systems. Set lines of correlation that disappeared, guys. You got to catch it in line screen. There it is. So we got confirmation it's all done. Right? Set position. Correlations of platforms 1, 0, 0 lines of 1, 0 lines of 2, and 12 foundation lines of 0 graph. Done by equation. It's all done. Right? So we're all done now. So now you say, woo! In position. So what were we are in position lines of setting? What did we come into positions of when we got in track locations? Yes, dating line communications. 24/7. Where are we now? 24/7. Okay. So everything is done. All through equation. All through calculation. Okay. So I just want you guys to understand the representation, what you're coming to track lines communication system. Right? So we're back. We're lines and screen lines adaptations at 24/7. Putting lines of communication setting, all travel calculations modifications to a single location of center operates from nothing and nothing of everything. So we've all lines of communication lines. So the direct symbolism and line calculation lines of highest interference is no longer of its equal sign. It's gone. Okay. So all that is out. It's not existing anymore. Confirmation system, set position track lines. See you in 5.